Hello?
Why, hello there. This is the 10th episode of the Geoconservative Files. Today I'm here with Johnny. Say hello there.
Nice to meet you. I'm Johnny. Glad to be on the Geoconservative podcast.
I'm glad you are too. So I heard. So we've talked a bit before. We met on Discord, and you talked about how you're an artist, and
Yeah.
what do you do as an artist?
Well, I mean, I there's two main things that I do. I try to improve my work, and I try to actually get projects done. I have two major projects, and then I have the forum, which is World College of Life. Um, that's that's the bulk of what I do. Everything else is just like not important really. I spend you know um, pretty much all of my free time working on this stuff. I'm very much interested in being a part of the new artistic scene, especially an artistic scene that relates to me on a very personal level. I got into dissident politics around probably 2018 when I was in college. Um, and it has been probably one of the most fascinating journeys that I guess I can ever be blessed with. I've met some really wonderful people, some very very fascinating people who have majorly changed my life. I would say, and completely changed the way I look at the world. Um, and I don't know what else to add to that. I kind of lost my
Yeah,
train of thought.
well. I think you did a good job answering the question. We have the link to your website, World College of Life, down in the description. Why don't you tell me about that website? What do you hope to accomplish there?
Well, I got the idea from my time on Our $1 Million Extreme. I really wanted there to be sort of an artistic, sort of like a default or a de facto for people within sort of like the MDE bomb strap, uh, kind of dissident sphere, kind of right wing traditional sphere, but not something that's like overly overly larpy, not something kind of like IC, not something or not something that I think would just sort of devolve into like into a circle jerk necessarily. Although one thing I have to note is the fact that if you don't make something explicitly right wing, it eventually becomes left wing. That's something I've learned from studying NRX and a lot of NRX people. Um, So it's kind of a juggle, but basically the idea is we want to start a real artistic community. I have seen some other attempts to create something like this, except I think they went about it all wrong. There's a few websites that I won't name, or not that I have really anything that I had to say about them. I just think that the way that they go about kind of creating one of these artistic spheres, I think is um, they either don't update the website enough, or they don't really have much consistency, or it's just sort of like it almost looks like a fed honeypot, like like
All the
there's this
Wignites,
one,
all the Wignats and proprietarians just swarm in there.
yeah, there's this one that I'm still questioning whether or not I should do like a stream on it, because it's so it looks like it almost looks like a parody, like sort of like an MDE skit if like there was like a like the FBI was like trying to set up a honeypot, and like this is like the content that they would put up. I think that's pretty mean, but um, anyways, I don't want to like get too much into
Have you
that.
seen have you seen like one last thing I'd say about that is like Doolittle's Law of Politics that Distributist talked about. Have you seen that live stream? The Doolittle's Law.
No, I did. I did. When I first got into this, I did look into propertarianism for a little bit, but then I kind of realized something wasn't quite right about it. Um, you know,
Yeah,
I kind of take
the
Apollonian germs take on it that it's about
the
demoralizing the community.
the Doolittle's Law of Politics was made by distributists in the aftermath of proprietarianism's untimely death, and he basically stated that a sufficient amount of autism in the leadership of a political movement is indistinguishable from basically a Fed operation.
Yeah, and you know, like I don't want to comment too much on like other people in the sphere. I think that we just kind of have to move on beyond this. A lot of this infighting and
I
negativity
mean, yeah,
and
I
you know
mean,
fed ops and all that stuff.
I
But
mean, they yeah, what I would just say is if you're a Christian, you judge them by their fruits.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's
So
something I noticed. You know, I've always kind of struggled, I guess, with my spirituality. But I've always noticed in the dissident sphere, the secular people who I think I would have a lot more in common with, they just don't have their stuff together. They have just so much baggage, and they don't really present themselves very nicely. It really shows on them. It really shows on them.
oh well, I mean, I'm not going to. I think that's a general product of modernity. A lot,
Yeah, I would say
some
so.
people,
It's not really like
a lot of
you.
religious people have, as someone who is religious and hangs out around religious people, I know quite a few religious people who have similar problems, although it's not as like obvious because they usually have like a community to fall back on, whereas the more secular people don't have that fallback.
Yeah.
But moving on to your art, because this is a live stream about your theories on art and what you hope to accomplish as an artist. So what are your aspirations as an artist in this dissident sphere? How did your political transformation influence your art?
Well, I guess I've always been like I just like was just obsessively driven with I guess like trying to show people like a vision that was just completely radically different from anything that they are familiar with. Now I know it's kind of annoying. I know Death Grips fans are annoying, but like you know stuff like Death Grips that really resonated with me. That's some very alien, overwhelming music. That's just very much out there. Um, and I guess I would say that I've always been interested in radical, um, I guess like radical change and radical ideas. And I guess this was just sort of a natural progression for me. What I would say is that when it comes to the political motives, I think that you know art should be um, typically subversive. I think it should serve a political purpose, and I think it should also serve a you know social purpose in uplifting people as opposed to something that's just purely aesthetic or something that is um, purely indulgent. I think my my beliefs about art are very strongly inspired by John C. Gardner's ideas of art, who I don't agree entirely with. I think the guy was sort of trapped in modern liberalism, but he had a lot of very important insights, and I think that he was very reactionary for his time. Um, I mean, considering the
He
fact
had
that like,
he wrote the book this novel called Grendel, which was a retelling of the Beowulf myth from the monster's point of view.
yeah, that I would say had like a really big impact on me as a kid, because at that time I was in middle school. I was dealing with well, not middle school. I think it was like late middle school, early high school or something, and I think it was like eighth grade. But I was for years I was obsessed with I guess the existence of God and basically nihilism, and it drove me absolutely crazy for years. And it really resonated with me because he was able to express things in such a way that um, I guess I could not find anywhere else, where he was expressing those thoughts and feelings on such an accurate and I guess visceral way for me. And I don't think Mr. Gardner is perfect. Um, I have I'm not like as much of a sycophant for him as I once was, but he's had a major impact on the way I view art. He's had a major impact on, he in a way he kind of led me to these ideas. I would say I've always been searching for people who are trying to rise above the mediocrity, in this modern world.
I see. So, maybe you can. I'd like to. Speaking of, the mediocrity of this modern world, I'd like to pose a question to you, and maybe that can get us into some deeper ideas. But if you look at the right wing sphere on YouTube, and this applies even to like more normie conservatives. You have Dennis Prager and Roger Scruton and Paul Joseph Watson, and all these different people talking about the decline of art. You have Paul Joseph Watson complaining that museums are putting literal piles of trash and saying that it's
Yeah.
art. He complains about that all the time. You have this one guy named Sarab Amari, who
Hmm.
used to be like a liberal skeptic, anti-SJW, but then he became like a Catholic integralist, which is kind of
Yeah.
which is a very I think Amari in our circles is better known for his recent debate with Dave French.
Mhm.
The French Amari debates. You can look that up.
Yeah, I
Uh,
didn't. I actually didn't catch that. Um, I'll have
yeah,
to look at.
that one was. I mean, to put it briefly, that one was basically like what would happen if you had an actual conservative Christian going against a quote unquote conservative Christian that's really a liberal, and who, I mean, the highlight of the debate was David French saying that uh, you know trans drag queen story hour is like one of the would be accepted by the founding fathers of America. That was one of the highlights. Yeah.
Dude, that's awesome.
Yeah,
Dude, did he say that?
yeah, he
That's
said
awesome.
that. I mean, it peels it sheds the scales from your eyes, really. I mean,
That's
maybe it peels the scales from your
wow.
eyes, like,
That's
yeah,
like
because
yeah.
Amari isn't even like a racialist. He's just like a Christian conservative who thinks that America should enforce like more socially conservative laws. And then he talks to Dave French, who's like one of the main writers at National Review, and Dave French is like, well, drag queen story hour is defended by the Constitution. It wouldn't the founding
Yeah.
fathers wouldn't ban
Yeah,
something like that.
I think the founding fathers would probably
Yeah.
like beat the shit out of that guy.
So yeah. So Sohrab Ahmari, well, in his earlier book, back when he was a liberal, Sohrab Ahmari wrote a book called The New Philistines that talked about how he blamed identity politics for ruining art, because he said that these artists were taking, like, rather than pursuing the good, and the beautiful, and expanding their horizons.
In the room.
Uh, uh, you're going?
No, no. I
No,
just
no, okay. Rather than exploring the true, the good, and the beautiful, and opening their horizons, they're trying to rigidly conform their art to the standards of like your average Twitter feminist or whatever, and
Hmm.
trying to queer Shakespeare or something.
Oh yeah.
Uh, and then you also have like Roger Scruton talking about how modern artists reject any ideal of objective beauty
Hmm.
and any kind of objective standard in art, and they're like, well, whatever I put on that paper, whatever I make, that is art by virtue of me being an artist or something.
Yeah.
And uh,
I think.
uh,
Yeah.
and I'd like to hear like, and all of these people have, so all these people have different answers for why modern art sucks, why modern art gets a bad rep. But I'd like to hear what's your take on modern art?
I would say, first off, I would say that the conservative discussion on modern art is just not very interesting, and I think that it's really, I think, it kind of misunderstands some things about the purpose of art. I mean, first off, I mean, what the conservative reaction to modern art typically is just sort of like oil painting fetishism. Now, I really admire the works of old, but they don't really, I think, carry the same relevance that they once did. I think that they're more of an ancestral, um, and a spiritual kind of thing. I don't think that they are relevant to modern people, and not even to really modern nationalists and traditionalists. I think that one thing that people have to get over is the fact that uh, technique is no longer necessarily political. It's really about the content. It's really about the subject matter. That's what matters. It's not really about the level of abstraction. It's more about the values that are carried, and by the end experience of the thing. Um, as I do respect a lot of modern art. I mean, one of my favorite artists is a guy who literally just makes sculptures from uh, light fixtures. His name is Dan Flavin. Now, one thing you got to understand about a lot of these modern artists is that they probably just have autism. That when they create these weird sculptures that have very little purpose to them or very little content, it's mostly, I would say, at least it used to be mostly about just the artist fulfilling his tactile and visual autism. I mean, if you look at guys like what do you call him, like Richard Serra, for example. You look at the torqued ellipses. Now I've been to the torqued ellipses many times in person, and the first time I was there, I did not appreciate it much. It really takes revisits to kind of understand what he was trying to capture, and it's really the atmosphere of walking through those things. It's not really just the shapes; it's also, I mean, it's almost feels like a cave walking through those things, and it's a very specific feeling that he was going for, but it's to a normal person, not to a rich autistic, you know, XYZ. It's just like, what is this crap? It's not, it's you
It's
really have to spend a lot of time on it, I think.
it's like it's in its own echo chamber. Like they don't have any kind of, they can't get their point across to a wider audience.
Yeah, but it's also sort of it's also sort of about kind of going deep inside that niche. I think that they're very much aware that they could create more accessible works. I don't really think that that's what their intention was. Um, but I do
Hmm.
find it very interesting. I do find it very interesting the public's disconnect um, with contemporary art. I think that a lot of it has to do with what I call the Surrever concept. And basically, um, I think that there is a real appeal to modern art, and that's why it exists. There is a real appeal, but it's something that's very niche. It's something that is, very above average IQ, not necessarily high IQ, but certainly very above average IQ. Um, there is an
Mm.
appeal to it. It's the presentation of the space. It's you have to see some of these sculptures in person, I guess. The atmosphere of the Dia Beacon, for example, is very impressive. I would think it's just these huge, spacious hallways with artworks that are themselves very large, being totally subsumed in the space. Um, you know, an object doesn't feel very significant if it's just in a room with a bunch of other stuff. But if you put it in a blank room, a giant blank room, you put a I don't know, like a bunch of cubes stacked with like some sort of a cloth texture on it, just something random like that. You put that in like the middle of like a giant oak floored, warehouse, right, with bright white walls, right? It's still very, it's very impressive, even though it's not necessarily like technically very well done. There is an appeal to it. It's just very niche, and it's something
Well,
that isn't really that important.
uh, I mean, there are like, I'm actually of the opinion that, part of it is, uh, the art, it has become less about seeking the higher truth and more about it's more self-referential. It's talking about
Yeah,
like the artist and the person viewing the art. So it's essentially, it's supposed to give somebody, rather than giving somebody the experience of beauty, it's giving them the experience of someone who looks at high art. It kind of reminds me of like those people who go around saying, "Oh, you have to have a pretty high IQ to get Rick and Morty."
yeah,
It's and Moldbug says, mentions Moldbug, who is one of these right wing thinkers. Uh, he has a an essay on his blog called "An Almost Pure Empty Poetry," where he reviews this Greek poet's art called "An Almost Pure Empty Walking," and the poems are like really bad poetry,
yeah. I've
and
listened to that. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
very and so it's it,
Well,
and he,
I'm very much aware of the superficiality of I would say a lot of contemporary art, and I am very much aware of guys like I mean, even guys that sort of rub it in people's faces, guys like Damien Hirst, for example, who I guess who is sort of aware of the fact that what he's doing is completely asinine, and he's baiting people on. And I don't really take contemporary art, this is important. I don't take contemporary art that seriously. Just because that they're in galleries, in these prestigious galleries making billions, I don't view them as that relevant. They're only relevant to like rich people and like people that are dumb enough to read, like the New York, like very like, like soulless bugman publications that like nobody reads. Like, art isn't really that art, at least established art, is not really that relevant culturally. I think it's really more of mass media generally. It's more internet culture. Uh, I don't think guys like what's his name, like what's this guy's name? I gotta pull this guy up from Art 21. He's
the guy who wrote the bad
Oh,
poems.
here he is. Here he is. This is if you want to see like the epitome of like asinine contemporary art. Google Art 21 Inigo Manglano Oval. I will link it right here. and go to the part where he's washing windows. Uh,
Watch
yeah,
washing windows.
and it's the most asinine thing you will ever see. I saw this when I was in. I saw this in my art history class, and I wrote in my response paper. I wrote, "This guy should be turned into hamburger meat." And the teacher like wrote a note like, "Are you okay?"
Well, it's about like it's purely about like the status of it.
Yeah, I mean,
That's kind of why I talked about like Rick and Morty. You have to have a high IQ to get it.
I would say
Um,
it's I would say it's that, and it's also like just some of this niche autism. I do think that some of it has some value, but I don't overall. I don't view it as something that culturally relevant anymore. At least it used to be. Certainly, there used to be an outlet for, I guess, real art, but technology and of course subversion of galleries
mm,
kind of destroyed it. Not that I think that I don't think that really returning galleries back to a prior state would really undo any of it. I think it's already been done by technology. I mean, art these days is so plentiful, and it comes in so many different techniques, and new techniques are coming out literally every day, that it's almost like technique no longer matters. It's really about what you are saying. It's really about how you are saying it. And most art I find typically, and I'm mostly referring to like illustration because that's one of my main interest is illustration, um, stuff like that, or illustration like design based illustration. Guys like Nicholas Menard. Um, you should look another one of these autistic Bugman artists. Um, I just, I think I lost my train of thought there, but
you were talking about all these different people. They have it. It's a combination of like what I was talking about, it being reduced to
yeah,
just status symbol for rich people, and also the artists themselves are kind of weird people in them, weird,
yeah, oh yeah,
and
basically, yeah, yeah. Most art
um,
I would say is typically aesthetic, and another, and when it's really good, the thing is when it's really good, um, and this I guess is from an autistic perspective. Um, I'm not really that autistic. I'm like slightly, probably. But
I'm pretty autistic.
yeah, but I would say that when it's really good, it tends to be like Bugman stuff. It tends to be like really soulless and kind of creepy. Um, and I respect a lot of these artists. I actually collect a lot of this stuff. One of my favorite artists would be Michael DeForge, who is like one of these. He's like one of these Tumblr artists. He had a very big impact on my work, I would say. Um, but these far leftists typically, especially like very good, you know, good artists that are far left, technically good. They tend to be kind of soulless, and they tend to distort the face a lot. That's something that I've noticed. Whenever you see like art that's like clearly made by a leftist, it's usually because they did something to the face that was kind of creepy, that they kind of left because because they have a lower disgust response. They're less grossed out by things.
That's a pretty interesting theory. What I mean, you said now when we discuss things in private, you know, you talked about the problem with Barnes and Noble, and
Yeah,
I didn't quite get it at the time because I personally like Barnes and Noble. But why don't you explain to the audience? Yeah, why don't you explain to the audience the problem with Barnes and Noble and how it uh, pertains to this kind of mediocrity of the modern world that we've
yeah.
been discussing?
I think it's very. I mean, it's not like that big of a deal, but like I just kind of like noticed that like when you look at their artwork, especially like the best stuff, you look at if you go on stuff like there's an Instagram called It's Nice That you can check out probably some of the best illustrators out there today, and it's typically like it's. By the way, it's very strong, a very strong sense of design. I'm typically very impressed with what I see with these people, but it's uh, the extent of their vision is basically Barnes and Noble. They basically want to turn the world into a Barnes and Noble. Like even like more niche, like more radical leftists. If you look at like the cover of like Jacobin magazine, for example, or like any like material related to like Chapo Trap House or anything like that, or any of these like I don't want to like straw man and say like co-ops. I know that in their spheres that's kind of a meme. Um, but like you look at their artwork and it's like a bunch of like neat stuff, like visually like almost like visual popcorn, visual candy, and it's all like woven together in like a random way. Like instead of like making a composed image, they'll have like a bunch of like stuff, like a bunch of like characters like running around, and like one character is holding a ball and chain, and the other character is holding a I don't know, skull and crossbones, and the skull and crossbones is weaved into this building, and the building is weaved into, and they'll have like a bunch of little characters like in a utopian Marxist kind of thing, just like being happy, and like it looks like they're trying to depict like Portland or like you know like like a craft brewery, like some sort of like a natural locally owned farm, right? It's a community farm, right? And it's just such a vapid and shallow view of the world. It's purely materialistic. They're trying to like add morality to like materialism. It's just like pathetic. Like if you ever been into a Barnes and Nobles, like that's literally their whole imagination. It's like these little leather bound classics of like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and like oh, look at the cover of this look at the cover of this Dune book, right? Look at how neat the graphics are. I hate Barnes and Noble. I could never figure out why too. Ever since I was like like I guess in high school or whatever, whenever I go into a Barnes and Noble, I would just get this sense of dread that I could not place. It always put me in a bad mood, and I think it was because of just this. It almost felt like that was like the extent of like what reality could be, like because this stuff is like pitching to you like that this is the future in sort of a on sort of an implicit level, and it feels like all these experts that are just so miles ahead of you and that have created this little world, they have established the boundaries of it, and it just feels like I don't know, like eating a bunch of pancakes and like sitting in your room all day.
Yeah, that's the future. A guy sitting in his room eating pancakes all day, talking about, laughing at ironic jokes on
Yeah.
the internet and streaming Netflix or something. Like
Or
this
no,
is weird.
watching genuine stuff, watching stuff like John Oliver, like with your wine aunt girlfriend, right?
It's a yeah. I mean, it's sort of like the people who are it's sort of like the people who are in charge don't have uh don't have an idea of the future or that
Yeah.
for this era. Like if you look at the aesthetics of previous eras, when they depicted the future, it was always something different for each generation. Like you had you had Aliens, which had that kind of cassette tape future.
Yeah.
That was you had the Jetsons, who had that kind of weird looking future. It's kind of. I mean, it's the Jetsons. Are you familiar with the Jetsons?
Yeah, Jetsons.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about the Jetsons is like it's almost quaint now because the Jetsons were basically the 1950s, but with flying spaceships and aliens.
Yeah.
Like but it's just it's a very but it was a very optimistic view of the future. Whereas when you look at um, you know the progressives view of the future, it's basically Barnes and Noble but communist.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
you know
co-op
what's
Barnes and Noble, co-ops Barnes and Noble.
yeah, Barnes and Noble third positionism.
Barnes and Noble.
Yeah,
It's worker owned Barnes and Noble. That's I think
yeah,
that's the term.
Strasser's Barnes and Nobleism.
Yeah.
I actually got
uh,
into I actually got into this movement, I think, largely from that interest in this future vision of the left. When I was a normally conservative, I got into like vaporwave music, and I created my own subgenre that caught on for like a little bit. It was called Metro Song. There's still some trannies on like Twitter that still talk about it. But we had a bunch of like albums. Like one of them was called Sustainable Future Village, and it was like this. Like a lot of people really loved this album at the time. It felt really fresh because instead of like depicting like this like nostalgia that never happened, like nostalgia for a future that never happened, it was like this actually like it was actually like a future being suggested already, like right now. Like Verizon commercials, like TED Talks, Bitcoin, and like Coney 2012. Like if you look at the ad campaign for Coney 2012, um, and we had a bunch of albums that I basically like would go around and I would like get people to like make these albums like for me or with me, and it was really fun. And what was funny was that like I started to realize when I was like making this stuff that I was like, if our like vision of the future is so wrong, it's probably going to look completely different. Well, that probably means the way we look at race is going to be different. And I eventually got into like dissident stuff. I eventually got into like Ryan Falk stuff, um, and it completely clicked. I think I've always kind of known that something was wrong with this. Um, when I was a kid, I remember in being in the social studies class, and they would teach us about scientific racism. And I remember like looking at the images of like these drawings that these scientific racists made, and I was always just thinking to myself, man, like it almost feels like beyond the it almost feels like if you were to look at that image, there are like some invisible like iron bars in front of it, and then if you could only open the iron bars and like escape through the image, you would be free. So I've always kind of known something was wrong. Um, Especially considering I feel like I kind of implicitly understand that we're kind of caged in these things, at such a young age. Um, but yeah, they don't really have a coherent vision of the future anymore. When you look at like works like Dark Side of the Moon, for example, like that was a very convincing, a very beautiful and convincing picture for what the future could be. And even if you go back to like the 2000s, there was still a lot of life in, I guess, this ideology. In the 2000s, it became more of like a college university aesthetic. It was more like anti-white. It was stuff like Tim and Eric, Whitest Kids You Know, like The Office, like Jim Gaffigan. There was still like another one would be Wonder Shows, and that would be another one. There was still like a lot of life, I would think, in this view, and maybe there still is. Maybe with the BLM stuff there is, but I don't really see it anymore. It's clearly not as strong as it once was. I mean, um, I think that really it's mostly manufactured these days. I don't think there's really um, an implicit interest in this vision anymore. I think it's something that it's more of like a religious thing.
I see. I see. So, you, I mean, shifting topics for a moment. What would you mentioned earlier this protologism that you had come up with called Surrever. What is
Mhm.
Surrever, and why should we start using this term?
Well, Surrever is basically something that, first off, I'm not even entirely sure if this has been extensively written about. I reached out to a guy named Paul Talk, for example, who's sort of rejects. That's kind of larky when I said reject, but he's sort of against like modern art, I guess. And he's a much more experienced artist, and he was actually stumped. He actually didn't. He thought that there might be something to what I was saying. Right now, of course, I'm reading. I'm trying to like get literate uh, on some works that actually like talk, like maybe potentially talk about this stuff. I'm reading. Let me get into it. But basically, the idea of Surrever is that there's a psychological process where typically in art, for example, concrete and abstract or missing information play off each other to create sort of an imaginative effect. For example, this wall drawing that I made, there is concrete information in this drawing. There's also a lot of, and for example, this shape right here, this like tubular shape, like what even is like it's unclear what that is, for example. And what happens is that because your mind desires to, I guess, map out your environment and to establish it, to make sure that, I guess, to completely understand one's environment, or something along those lines, your mind just ends up filling in those blanks with a number of imaginative propositions. So when you look at the this tube shape, you will, if you look at it enough and you think about it enough, or not really that much, but when you look at it in the context of what's going on in the drawing, your mind again will fill in with a bunch of imaginative scenes and imaginative propositions. So it's sort of like a jungle floral scene kind of. There's a toucan. There's there's a lot of ferns. Um, there's some. There's like a crescent moon at the top, and your brain will sort of cycle through these things. And that's really, I think, how art works. And that's what I think the best art does. The best art is able to navigate through these two different ends of the spectrum, concrete and abstraction, and in order to tease you towards certain effects. And this is something that I found in stuff, especially stuff like Shakespeare, for example. Shakespeare, there's a lot of confusion about what his motivations are. And I know it's kind of uninteresting to talk about how artists will like there's sort of like this problem of um, is the art actually meaningful, or is it like just pretending to be deep? I think that's an interesting conversation. But there is this sort of curiosity about, for example, whether or not some of the characters actually saw a ghost, or what's the deal with the play within a play, et cetera, et cetera. And we find this again with poetry. Poetry is taking these concrete little linguistic blocks and spacing them out in a very breathy way that teases your mind out to towards certain end effects. And I think what has to happen in art with this idea that I had, the Surrever concept, is you have to start thinking about art specifically from the end effect as in very, very aggressively and very radically trying to milk this effect very purely, very in order to evoke very strong reactions from people, in order to evoke overwhelming sensations. Not just something that is superficially aesthetic or aesthetic, but also like not entirely meaningful, or something that is like kind of vapid, kind of uninteresting, or sort of overdone. That's another thing. You basically want to focus all of your attention on this end effect, and you achieve that end effect through the Surrever process, right? So it doesn't really matter what kind of a technique you necessarily bring, so long as that technique ends in this effect, whatever the intended effect is. It's all about matching these things. You can create great art with, pixels, pixel art. I know that one thing that drives me crazy about pixel art is the fact that it has all these connotations of video games. I really wish it didn't, because it kind of ruins it. It's a beautiful art form. It doesn't need that, but it doesn't matter what sort of a effect you're going for, so long as it has this strong contrast between implied intention and ambiguity, right? That there seems to be something going on in the technique, in the strokes, in the shapes, and your brain wonders about those things. Now, what it wonders about, that is up to the placement of concrete information again. So it's not just like vapidly fooling people necessarily, though you can do that. You can just pivot a strong technique and ambiguity together to create an effect very easily. You could look at like surrealist art, for example. Surrealist art is typically just that. It's that with like kind of a superficial idea of like dreams, right? Not that I'm necessarily kidding.
You're not going to get me defending surrealist art here. I mean,
I actually really like surrealist art. I do recognize that it's a little just aesthetic, I think.
well, from what I can tell, your Surrever concept is essentially about um, first first creating in the art, creating in the person viewing the art rather, uh, creating in the person viewing the art this sort of hint that there is something deeper, that gets the person thinking, and you combine that with a very concrete clue as to what
Yeah,
that is.
like you
And
draw a figure, but you don't necessarily draw every piece of the figure, and that's because what happens is that your mind will fill it in with biased propositions, and so that's that's why that's how like that's how it works, right? It's like, for example, if you're a little kid, and this is a counterexample with I would say negative Surrever. Um, if you're a little kid and you hear a noise in your closet, you don't just imagine um, like a rational sort of animal or monster. You imagine the worst possible thing you can. Or if you're thinking about, say, something that is erotic, you will think about the most attractive scenario or woman you can, right? That's just how it works, I think. And sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought again.
well, I know. Well, I wanted to go on to like a concrete example. So, what would you say because you said in our previous conversation that Surrever was something that you noticed occurred with a lot of the art that is famous and
Yeah.
famous and world renowned. Could you give me an example, like say in like I don't know the Mona Lisa?
Yeah, the
Or
Mona Lisa is there's a lot of mystique surrounding the Mona Lisa. Her smile, her lack of eyebrows. Of course, I know that the Mona Lisa, a lot of the appeal came later, actually, when the Mona Lisa was stolen, and the tabloids all read that the thief stole it because he was so like obsessed with the genius of the work. Um, I mean, really take a look at any great work of art or any well done painting. One off the top of my head would be the Arnolfini portrait. Let me pull up the Arnolfini by Jan van Eyck, and let's pull him up. He's, there's a lot of concrete things here, obviously. I mean, obviously, but there's also like a lot of there's also like there's this dissonance between intention and lack of clarity. Now, again, when I say lack of clarity, I don't necessarily think you should just like try to necessarily like bluntly, you know, confuse the viewer. But like it's a subtle thing. It's simply that's literally just adding air into what you're drawing or what you're creating. You could think of it like building a campfire. There's the concrete fuel for the fire, and there's also the necessary air that has to go through it. You have to allow there to be spaces between these concrete elements for there to be a real fire, right?
I see. Yeah, yeah. And you talked about negative Surrever, and you used the example of the monster in the closet.
Yeah, I think
Um, it,
also, yeah, I'm still trying to figure it out too, because there's a lot of stuff that does not provoke um, Surrever, I would think. And there's also stuff that seems to almost be like I would say like almost like a bad, like I said, like a bad, like bad Surrever. Like for example, like a lot of and I think that this extends beyond art. This can be used for the political, like as a dimension to look at within politics, especially like NRX stuff. Um, like what is the deal with LARPing? Why is it that whenever um, any kind of group of people try to, I guess, start something, it always just looks really embarrassing. It always just looks really like everything wrong with it, I would say. You could look at like a lot of like Wignac groups, or like Kurt Doolittle, for example, when he's like giving this speech with like, Victorian, this like, like colonial Shakespearean language. Like, why is that so embarrassing? Why is that so cringy? And I think Survivor has something to do with it. And I think that, since political movements are really just branding with a bunch of stuff behind it, I think it's very important that we understand and sort of expand this idea to something much more fleshed out. Because I think it can be useful in trying to create some alternative establishment. Because one thing that I've noticed throughout all of ancient history, or really all of history, is that all of these powerful institutions, they always have these crests and crowns and headdresses and power objects. They're just unusual and discombobulated objects that seem to sort of fake you out with their confidence. And I think that we sort of lack that. It's almost like we have to melt into the aesthetic of the established order. For example, guys like Nick Fuentes, they actually pull off a nice look, but that's because he has to adopt the aesthetic of something that already works, which already like is built into this sort of global homo aesthetic, right? He has to like dress up as sort of like a normie, like conservative talk show, right? And that works, and of course also, traditional Catholics seem to have a much easier time. And I think that's largely because part of it too is because they are very much established. And I think you might have said that to me. I think it was you that might have said that. It's because like humans have this instinct that whenever somebody's acting out in a group, to sort of cringe at that person because they don't know their place in the hierarchy.
Well, yeah, I mean, when you're looking at like a LARPer, you realize that, okay, this person, whereas I can see where it can be, it's different from like the monster under the bed, because
Yeah.
like the because with Surrever, you have the emotion comes from, there's a gap between what is implied and what is not implied, in your head, and your mind fills in the gaps, and that's what creates the emotional reaction, and also it sort of intellectually stimulates you. You see this, it might be in a really good work of art like the Mona Lisa, or it might be like the child hiding from the monster in the closet, that invokes a different emotion, fear. Or it could be this odd effect where you have it when you have a drawing of a sexy woman, the scantily somehow the woman who is kind of scantily clad is more exciting than the woman that's just completely naked.
Yeah.
Because it's this gap between what's on the page and your expectation, and and then you combine that with like a concrete clue, and it creates this mystery that you're excited to solve.
Yeah.
Whereas with like the LARPers, they have something that they're very obviously like the emperor with no clothes. They have that emperor with no clothes effect where it's like, I'm I have this mask. It's like the mask where, the meme where it's like you have the smug expression mask, and then underneath you're crying, the Wojak is crying. That is the LARPer. That is, they're basically putting on an act, and it's very obvious. And it's very obvious
It's
that
like, yeah, and it's also like, the thing is, I have trouble defining it because it's like it's almost like the effect doesn't come off the ground. It's like when you look at them, it's like you don't get like that sort of effect. It doesn't come off of them. And I'm trying to think of like, why is it that some things produce the effect and others don't? I'm curious, like why, like what is it, like what is the stale point? Like
well,
where?
maybe it's what it's in like what's it hints, like the things that produce the Surrever effect. They're hinting at something beyond what you're seeing. Whereas with negative Surrever, what you're hinting at is this is empty.
Yeah,
You're hinting at this is fake. This is empty. That is
yeah,
what
this is
you're hinting
fake.
at.
This is plain. Yeah.
And so
Yeah, actually, I think that clears it up because you don't have this effect when you are walking around doing your business. It's you might have like little tiny twitches of it, but nothing noticeable. Um, Whereas when something is, I guess, revealed and made obvious, then that goes away. Um, then that effect is just completely gone. Because there are situations where it occurs and there's situations where it does not occur. Um, and I mean, obviously, when you boil these things down, the Surrever concept becomes just like the basic mechanics of how like people think. But then again, I mean, it's still a useful heuristic, I guess, or a simple shorthand for this sort of pattern that we see.
You said before. What would you say is like the origin of the word survivor? Why did you choose that word?
Well, it's very hard to come up with a good word for it. I wasn't even entirely satisfied with the term, because it's cringe coming up with your own word. Um, and I just decided to play off of the etymology of surrealism. And I basically took the sur, which means beyond, and then I took from the French reverie, which means dream to dream. So I just took Surrever, like, and that's it. I could have called it Suravisha or something like that. That sounded nice. But I mean, that sounds like very pretentious. We don't really have much power, but I mean, I guess like the more it's used, maybe it could work. But I did have to come up with a word to describe it because I just could. I'd have to go through the entire process of explaining it in order to, and then again, I mean, like it's important for us to take control of our language.
Oh yeah, definitely. And if you're the thing is, you're not it's not like you are like needlessly multiplying words to be pretentious. You are noticing a pattern. You are noticing a pattern that forms a concept in your mind, and then you're looking through and since the language does not have a word for this concept yet, you are coming up with this idea, and maybe, like, for instance, and I can give you an example, and it seems like I know that in, like, maybe in a few decades time, like, everybody will realize that Surrever is just such this obvious concept,
Yeah,
but you
they're
know
all gonna be like they're all gonna build. They're all gonna like what is it with like I know this is kind of me, but like there's this thing that drives me crazy about Sargon of Akkad, where like he has this idea in his head of like being like sort of like not like a famous person in like a history textbook, but like a lesser, like one of the like lesser kind of like the people that kind of splash in, guys like Malcolm X. Like that's like the vision that he has. That's what's good. That's what I'm gonna be. I'm gonna be like one of these like um, B level famous art people.
well, I think that's actually a pretty good aspiration for a young artist like yourself. I think it's very good. Uh, oh, here it is. Like, I'll give you an example of like somebody coming up with the word. So this German philosopher named Martin Heidegger, and part of his philosophy, because he's not a liberal, he's trying to come against like the liberal idea of the state of nature, being that we are all these, like, we were once in this state of nature when we were all rational individuals and we decided to come together to form society because something social contract. And Martin Heidegger said, no, we are basically thrown into the world randomly in whatever and wherever we land in this world, that determines our position. And we didn't really contract into these things. And
Yeah.
he used the German word Geworfenheit. Geworfenheit, I think it's called Geworfenheit. I don't speak German, which translates into English as thrownness.
Mhm.
Throne, as in thrownness, like the as in you have been thrown into this world, thrownness. And there was not a concept, as far as I can tell, there was not a concept like this before, or at least it did not have a name in the English language before Heidegger was translated into English, which is kind of interesting. So philosophers, what I'm trying to say here is that philosophers all the time, when they come across a concept that doesn't seem to have a language, like a word for it in the language that they're using, they will they will make up a word that describes the concept and hope that it will become a neologism.
Yes, and that actually gets into my fascination with language. I come up with a lot of protologisms. And for those who don't know, a protologism is a neologism that has not been accepted yet, or it just is not accepted. you know, um, and I actually include them a lot in my works. I'm very fascinated with the way people talk. I'm very interested in like arcane words and arcane phrases. For a while, I was looking into like Japanese. I still might study that. I have to study it differently. The way I'm doing it with Duolingo, like that's not the way you learn a language. You have to like quite literally learn it as a baby would. That's how you do it. Um, there's a video I can link on that, but not now. I am very much interested in language, and uh, in the work that I'm doing. One of the common themes is like made up languages. I don't really have anything published yet, but I intend to publish a short, sort of an illustrated prose work, sort of like a novella. That I have like the first draft done. I'm on the second draft right now, and basically all the characters are like they're in this like they're in a totally different culture with a different language.
Ah, I see. Yeah, I mean the whole it would make sense that you would have this kind of these kinds of fictional terms. Usually, like you would see that in like I don't know, like the in sort of Lord of you would see that in like fantasies. You would talk about like and it usually they usually would make up words to describe like the names of places or the names of like a magic or whatever.
Yeah, or concept.
But yeah, but there's not really
Yeah,
but there's not really a lot of times where they make up a word that describes a concept that we have in real life, but we don't have a language for in real life because the
yeah,
author is writing this in English, and they'd have to be a pretty creative wordsmith in order to make up something like that. Like William Shakespeare, part of what made him famous was how many words he was able to invent and introduce
yeah,
into the English lexicon.
yeah. And that's
Things like
probably because he's trying to make it flow very well and trying. I think he was very much aware of the end effect that I talk about.
you mean the Surrever effect?
Well, I don't know, not necessarily Surrever, but like he was certainly aware of the what he was looking for. Great art is produced when you have a feeling that you want communicated, and you're able to match that with the technique.
That's
I
that's
think,
pretty.
I think the reason why I created new words was because, and it's because just when I was writing, I kind of noticed this is that sometimes you just need to create a new word because the words available don't flow very well or don't sound very nice. Like
So
for
you're
example,
saying that.
yeah,
So you're saying
for
it doesn't. Well, sorry. Give your example first, and then I'll give my understanding of what you're saying.
for example, in the story that I'm writing, there's this one line. I think I could pull it up. I actually have it right here. Um, basically there's this line where it talks about the pores in a plate, like the very tiny, not microscopic, but very, very, very tiny ones. And I didn't think that the words available, such as microscopic or teensy, teensy would be the most accurate way of describing it, but the teensy doesn't sound very, very nice. It sounds kind of cringy. And then there's infinitesimal, which would not work. It's a little too wordy, I think. Um, tiny is like a little bit larger. When you think of the word tiny, you think of something like a frog or something like a chihuahua, right? Um, you know,
Hmm.
so like I'm trying to find the perfect word, so that would be a situation where I might come up with maybe I might come up with something that plays off of a little bit of uh, onomatopoeia.
Mm, mm. Uh, yeah, it's. I think that is something that, and maybe that could be a way out of this, sort of language manipulation we're seeing in a lot of our politics. Rather than having a language constructed to, win a political debate, like you see all these. Yeah, I remember reading an article complaining about, written by a leftist, complaining about all these Greek words that the left uses in that have just colonized our language and have destroyed reason, our ability to have conversations, like homophobia, for example. That's like a big Greek word. Nobody knows what that means really anymore, and part of the reason for that is because it's just like an obtuse word that doesn't fit into anywhere. And it was just put into our conversation by powerful people yelling it over and over with a megaphone until it became a meme. And yeah, and rather than having something like those kinds of words invented for cynical political reasons, we could have a language invented by artists to make communicate ideas in a way that isn't cringe, or
Yeah.
is more elegant.
Yeah, I mean, arguably, we are starting to see the rise of like a new dialect, I guess, in our spheres. The way that we talk is a lot different. There's some notable differences. There's certain terms that are used. There's certain, I guess, ways of talking that are a little bit different. Um, not anything like accents, but the kinds of like the way that you talk, the kinds of things that you talk about. It is changing, and I think that's a good thing. Um,
It's the
one
step.
of
It's
the
the first
ideas
step.
that I've had, and this is another.
Yeah, I was just going to
Hmm?
say that it's the first
Yeah,
step to creating a counterculture.
yeah. Uh, in fact, that actually gets into one of the other ideas that I have, which is more political. Um, and this is not a term I came up with; it was by a Discord user. The term cultural futurism. Now, I am not really a big fan of futurism. I think that the futurist movement was really cringy. But the term cultural futurism, I think, works very nicely. Um, and again, read the Futurist Manifesto. It's really bad. It's written nicely, but it's kind of cringe. And I think Mussolini kind of like ignored them because it was just like he didn't. Yeah, but cultural futurism is basically this idea I have it's sort of like, I guess, a right wing or a pronomian reaction to internationalism and globalism. Something that has a much longer and a much more complete end goal that I think might be more coherent. Now, it sounds a little LARPy and a little bit sci-fi, But basically, the idea would be to transition from the state of meaninglessness and triviality in in the LARPing and in identity, because all of our identities have been grayed out and washed out, and nationalism today is just flag waving. Even in places like Poland and Italy and Britain, I mean, we all have like the same technology and like the same like there's very little of difference anymore because of technology and internationalism. I think that the solution might be to, in a way, actually reverse this process through the construction of an entirely new and a radically different culture that is constructed from the ground up artificially. Of course, borrowing from cultures that we've inherited from our ancestors, obviously, not entirely scrapping them, but recognizing the facts that that we have been grayed out into dishwater. And going back as nationalists would just be to go back as, I guess, like a slightly stronger version of what we once were. I think we have to reset and build new societies, build new cultures, and to to balkanize these things, to balkanize these nations, and to isolate them in as many ways as possible, both like demographically as well as linguistically, as religiously, you know, and in terms of basic concepts. I think that I'm just not entirely sure what it would look like. But the vision that I'm trying to, I see my mic went out, not mic, my camera went out a little bit. Am I good?
It's okay. I mean, it's okay. You're sometimes your voice your audio has been fine for most of the time, but sometimes your video is a bit behind your audio, but it usually catches up.
Uh, yeah. Uh, I think that so basically this work that I'm coming out with, it'll take a while to finish. I'm very slow with writing. But I work on it every day, so don't worry. It's a work called I think I'm going to call it Spandrel, and it's basically about a completely made up human civilization on just sort of like a different version of Earth, I guess, with the same similar kind of creatures and similar kinds of races of humans with differences, of course, and just about everything about the culture is completely different. I think that what I want to show with this work is a vision of the world that is not necessarily a better version of the world, but just something that is different, something that is completely different from what we have. And I think we need to start thinking about it that way. Of course, being very small, I think it's of course just a LARP. But I mean, if I create perhaps an artistic institution with World College of Life, which is what I want to do with it. You guys, if you're artists, you should definitely join the forum. Then I think maybe we could talk more about this more seriously. You have any thoughts on cultural futurism?
What it sounds like to me is you're trying to do a lot of the you're trying to fix one of the problems that I personally had with science fiction and fantasy. And I will confess, I used to be like into anime, and I used to be very much into anime. And what got me out of anime in a lot of ways because was I would go into these like these kinds of fantasy genre anime, and the fantasy genre of and a lot of the a lot of them would be like this kind of parallel world fantasy. They call it isekai, or other world. Uh, eh, and in the isekai genre, the protagonist, it would have a similar plot to something like John Carter of Mars, where the protagonist would be magically transported to this other planet with fantastic, with all these fantasy stuff, and they would gain powers by virtue of being a foreigner from another planet on that story.
Yeah.
You know how John Carter, he gets magically transported to Mars for no discernible reason, and he gains super strength by virtue of Mars's lesser gravity. Uh, so it's like it's something like that happens. It's the typical power fantasy, but what bothered me so much about it was how you would you would have all these people, and the fantasy setting was always the same because it resembled pretty much every Japanese video game that's set in a fantasy world ever. Like it's like every fantasy, like every setting, all the it always took place in like Final Fantasy, Final
Yeah.
Fantasy, to the point where you could easily imagine like a mass crossover. Like you could imagine that each show was just set in like the same world because they all were the same. There was no creativity there. It's every single one of them set in the same world, and they had the same culture, and it was always like they had it was usually like a mixture of like Japanese culture, modern Japanese culture, because of course, with their weird idea of European culture, where it's like you have a church. If they have a church, it's like worshiping a goddess. It's like worshiping a goddess, and it looks superficially like Catholicism, but it doesn't.
I mean,
It's not anything
yeah,
like it. Like
it's
I'm rambling, but the point is, what I saw there was like there's no difference. Like you could have two elves talking about like warfare, and if you took the replace the names, if you replace the names, it wouldn't be out of place for two American generals talking about Iraq or something like that. It's like the language is the same, the culture is the same, the everything about it, any of the differences that they have in the culture are like minor, and there's a few that try to explore like culture shock, but it always feels very superficial, and it's
yeah.
like it's a dearth of imagination. It's like we can't imagine being outside the world being differently in a cultural sense. Like we're very good at imagining like a new technology. We're good at imagining like these aliens who have different body types and and we can imagine like these worlds with we can imagine like these worlds with cosmologies and all these gods and goddesses and stuff, but we can't imagine a different culture. And I think cultural
But
futurism, if it has any,
we can't
if it
imagine that alienness on ourselves.
well, exactly. And I think if anything, cultural futurism, if it's going to succeed as like an art movement, would have to break free of that
Yeah.
kind of rut that we've stuck ourselves in. Because one of the things that Moldbug pointed out in his more recent works, actually, and one thing he's pointed out is that is just kind of the globalization. That you would call it like everything becoming Barnes and Noble. He would say that everything is becoming like not like America, but it's the same. Everything.
Yeah.
Some people would say everything's becoming like California. but it's the same effect. It's like this homogenization where we it's almost like everything is being consumed by the Borg.
Yeah,
And
and I
it's
think
not
you
allowing
have
any
to.
kind of independent thought and creating these kinds of cultural futurist works, things that don't focus on the technology, but instead focus on like cultural technology, not instead of
Yeah.
material technology.
Like
Um,
I
I think
think that
that I think that
I
is the
very
future. I'm sorry if I
radical.
rambled a
This,
bit, but you just kind of it kind of sparked something in me as because I'm like a fictional writer myself.
yeah, I think what do you call it? Yeah, there is definitely a lesser
Oh,
and
Johnny, your mic isn't working. It's not coming through. I can't hear you. Uh,
you hear
can
me?
you hear me?
One second.
Oh gosh. Um,
I can hear you.
thought we fixed that. Oh, it's hmm. Hello?
Did I open up a new
I
one?
can't hear you still.
Yeah, hello?
I cannot hear you still.
Hello?
Um, uh, pri- uh, can you hear me? Oh, okay. So I guess that uh, I'm sorry for the technical difficulties, audience, but we are kind of wrapping up. It's just kind of a shame that um,
Hello?
we couldn't hear we couldn't get to like the best part. We I was going to ask you like what would you say to young artists who are right wing like yourself? But I guess you sort of answered that question. You threw out so many ideas, and you invited them to come on to the World College of Life. Uh, I suppose that's what you would say. Oh gosh, it's frozen. He is frozen. Oh well, I suppose we can start wrapping it up. The only person who commented this evening was Right Ruminations. I hope he's still watching this, and I hope he'll stop by some other time. But thank you for commenting, Right Ruminations. We should do a stream together sometime. I think we would enjoy it. Uh, so I wish that and maybe I can find him on Discord or something. Uh, yeah, the unfortunately, it's very it's not the technical difficulties on my end. That's for sure. My computer has been working quite well ever since I updated the internet. Uh, back in the early days of this channel, uh, the internet would give out part of the way through oftentimes because the it was worse than the internet in some parts of Africa. Like it was that bad. Oh gosh. So yeah, it's I I really did like a lot of Johnny's concepts. It was the idea of Surrever is pretty interesting. I think that he could develop that idea. He could stand to develop that idea a bit more, but you know implying that there's something there, whereas negative Surrever is where you're implying that something is empty on the inside, and that creates the dissonance, the dulling of feeling rather than the accentuation of feeling. uh but I think he has the right idea when it comes to a new creative art scene. And even if even if his art, I think his art is I don't know if I personally would like his art, but the ideas that he has and what he's trying to do in terms of those things, I think he's on the ball. And that's sort of reason why I wanted to have him on. Oh gosh, you're frozen and I can't hear you. Um, can you hear me? You are frozen and I cannot hear you. Uh, so, uh, well, Streamlab sucks. Yes, yes, it does. Anyways, I um I will say that I'm so glad that you and I were able to talk when we while you still were able to talk. Uh, we got a good hour and a half in, and I think you got across your ideas very well, and I think you have the right ideas going forward. And I look forward to seeing more of your work in the future. So I think I would ask you to say one last thing before you go, but does your mic work? What did you do to make it work last time? Well, in any case, sorry to hear that. Um, or rather, sorry to not hear that. Um, I really, gosh, that kind of threw me off my mojo because now I'm just like I don't know what to say to sign off. uh, Maybe I could just say it's very nice to have you on, Johnny, and I'd love to have you on again sometime. I think that you have a lot going for you, and I'll try and share this live stream interview with others in the future and try to get your writings out there once they get published. I think I can help you with them, being a writer myself. Uh, in any case, I think it's time to say goodbye. Uh, this is Mr. Geocon, and we're signing out today. Th- Thank you for watching, and goodbye.